What's the most scariest paranormal activity you or someone you know have ever experienced? This is a 3 generations story, so I apologize that I'm missing most of it. My mother only rarely talked about these things. There was a person-shaped shadow that followed my grandmother around, and it was considered normal by the family. Grandma died when my mother was about 16 years old, so still living at home with her family. Eventually my mom realized she hadn't seen the shadow in a while and asked her father about it. He said, and I quote, "The night your mother died, it left with a suitcase." No other explanation or information. The shadow carrying a suitcase just stayed a mystery. When my mom started getting old and ill, she started having problems with something that had moved into her home. Just observing her, she looked paranoid, layering multiple kinds of locks and alarms onto the front and back doors while living in a very good neighborhood. But in fairness to her, sometimes those doors would open while everyone was asleep. Her husband would feel a cold draft, wake up, go check, and find the front door hanging wide open, despite the 6 different kinds of locks and screech alarms on it. Mom was never known to sleepwalk, but for the longest time, I just assumed she was losing her marbles a bit. Then one day, Mom came out of her room to ask me about something, and her bedroom door slammed itself shut and locked from the inside while I was looking at it. I heard Mom calling, looked up, saw her walk through the open doorway without touching the door, and she got about halfway across the living room before it slammed shut. She had to wait for her husband to get home and pop the lock. The years passed some more, and my mom died when I was about 20 years old. And all of a sudden, guess who can't keep a locked door closed anymore? Me. It did not matter how many locks, how certain I was that I was locking it, the back door on my rental would not stay shut. What was worse, something kept touching me when I was alone. A hand on my shoulder sometimes, but mostly pokes in the back. Pretty unnerving to be engrossed in my computer screen and then poke, turn around, and be entirely alone. All I could figure was, the family ghost was back. I assumed I'd inherited grandma's and mom's shadow. The heck does one do about that? I compensated by adopting cats, a dog, and a ton of roommates. Then I could tell myself that roommates left the door open. The cat made that noise, and the strong touch on my back was just the dog's tail wagging as it walked by. So obviously, things escalated. My least favorite moment was the invisible butt grab. Poking my shoulder is one thing, but grabbing a handful of butt is another, and I did not appreciate that. The most hilarious from an outside perspective was probably the invisible hair pull incident. I was working a fast food drive-thru, understaffed and very busy, so I was basically spinning in fast circles between the order screen, the window, the drink station, and my manager handing my bags of food. And that is when something pulled my hair, straight up yanked on my ponytail. I couldn't exactly stop and freak out in front of my boss, I had to keep working. But while continuing to get food drinks out the window to people, I was twisting all over trying to look for something I might have gotten caught on, and half wondering if the manager had pulled my hair like a flipping kindergartner. Probably looked hilarious. I have a lot of stories about the first house I lived on. This is one of them. My youngest sister at the age of 3 or 4 made an imaginary friend. She will describe her as a blonde long-haired girl with a funny long pajama. My sister will play hours by herself and her imaginary friend when my parents will leave. So babysitting her was super easy. One night, my sister comes to me and tells how excited she is because her friend finally revealed her name, don't remember her name, and how she died. At her age, my sister didn't know anything about death. My sister goes on and tells me how her friend used to live in this building, ran out to the street without looking one time, and a lot of horses stepped on her. I was beyond terrified and couldn't sleep a bit that entire night. 8 years later, my family moved to a bigger house. A few months into the new house, my cousin phones my parents to ask if she could use the first floor of the old house to do a big sleepover for her birthday. I was invited because my cousin and I were friends. Before people start showing up to the sleepover, my cousin asks me not to tell any scary story about the place because she wanted everyone to stay. I of course agreed. A lot of people I didn't know arrived. These were my cousin's new friends from high school, and one of them was extremely interested in going upstairs. She wouldn't say why, but after an hour or so, lost interest. Out of the blue, the friend approaches me and tells me there is a girl upstairs excited to see me again. I panicked and went to my cousin to ask her if she decided to tell the scary stories. My cousin says no, so we asked her friend not to tell anyone else. 30 minutes later, the same friend approaches me and tells me the girl is extremely excited to see all these girls and she is at the bottom of the stairs. I was okay with that part of her sentence, but not with what followed. But the man who takes care of all the children is telling her to go upstairs with them. My whole life living there, I thought only this ghost girl existed in that place. So I've never believed in ghosts or anything, but once I did live in this apartment that would always creep me out at nighttime. Most of the time, I would just get a weird vibe from the place, but one night, around 1:30 a.m., I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth before bed. As I'm brushing, I hear 2 knocks at the door. I was in my kids' bathroom, so I figured it was just one of them having to use the restroom. I told them to come in and continued brushing. Looking in the mirror over the sink, I could see the door behind me. I watched the doorknob do a quarter turn, and then the door opened just a bit. But no one came in. My kids were young and it was the middle of the night, so I figured it was just one of them being sleepy. I opened the door expecting to find a child, but there was no one there. And then I heard it and my heart about jumped out of my chest. Breathing. Small rhythmic breaths. My kids were asleep across the hall. All 3 of them, in their beds. I ran down the hall to the master bedroom and saw my wife laying there, sleeping. I was alone and someone or something had definitely knocked on the bathroom door. And I had definitely invited it. And it definitely entered. We moved out a few weeks later. This is a story that happened many years ago, around 19 years ago in late 2001. My parents separated in late 2000, and we, my mom, brother and I, moved into a house next to the local high school. There is a very old tree in the side front yard, well over 110 years old. It always made the place look creepy. But it was the best place my mom could get on such short notice. It was a 2-story house with a small basement. 2 bedrooms on the upper floor, 1 on the main floor with the 1 bathroom. My brother didn't live there all the time, but after I turned 18, that was my primary residence with my mom. I had one of the upstairs bedrooms, my brother had the other. My mom used the bedroom on the main floor. A few times, while sitting in the living room, I had noticed my dog sit at the bottom of the stairs and stare up them. For a while, he would only stare at them, but eventually he started going up the stairs, turned into my bedroom, which was on the right side of the upstairs, and would go stand in front of my walk-in closet. After a minute or 2, he would turn around and come back down. I could hear his little toes clicking on the hardwood a few times before I finally followed him up to see what he was doing. And there he was, just standing there looking at my closet. I didn't really worry too much about it at the time. My mom had to travel for meetings and conferences, and one weekend, she was gone at 1. I stayed down on the main floor in her room because my dog usually slept down there anyway, and I wanted to sleep in her big bed too. I had settled in for the night and had the dog on the bed with me. The bedroom door was shut and I was reading a little before going to sleep. That was when I heard footsteps upstairs above me, coming from my bedroom. My brother was at my father's house and was too young to drive across town to my mom's. My mom was out of town, and the dog was on the bed next to me. The footsteps went from my bedroom, across the short hallway, and into my brother's bedroom. They walked around his small bedroom, back across the hallway into my bedroom and over to where my closet was. I didn't get up. I just laid there and tried to fall asleep. I didn't tell my mom about it, well, not until years later. Nothing was moved or missing. I just tried to ignore it. My dog would still stare at the stairs and go up them occasionally. I kind of just pushed it off as it was weird occurrence. I told my friend Jay about it though. He suggested bringing an Ouija board over and use it to find out what it was. I figured what could the harm be. So my friends J, T, C, M, and G came over one weekend when my mom was out of town for another work meeting conference. We decided that we would have enough room in the dining room for all of us. The living room was to my right and kitchen was behind me. We started using the Ouija board and asking just basic questions. It started telling us that there was the spirit ghost of a little girl that lived in the house. It also told us there was half a dozen other spirits present that evening. But only the little girl and the main one that was talking to us lived in the house. I asked if the little girl was who I heard walking between my room and my brother's room a few weeks prior. It said yes and that my room used to be her room and my brother's was her playroom. It told us that she had died in the house due to abuse of some kind. I asked if she is what my dog keeps following upstairs and it said yes, she hides in my closet sometimes. The majority of the time we were talking to an older male spirit. He told us that he had been hung on a branch of the large old tree that sat right outside of the house. I asked him where he was in relation to the rest of us. He said that he was in the living room. I said that he should come into the dining room with the rest of us. He asked if I was sure and I said yes. My dog was sleeping on the couch in the living room during this. All of a sudden, he got up off the couch, came into the dining room, sat down on the floor next to me and just looked up at me. I asked if he was in my dog, and it replied yes. I panicked at this point and yelled for it to get out of my dog. It said, I asked for him to come in there and I yelled back, but not using my dog. My dog got back up and went into the living room again and laid down. We continued to talk to the spirit after this for a while after that point. It mentioned that there were not so good spirits behind me in the kitchen and that it was keeping them in there. My friend C said that she didn't believe it. It warned her to not go in there. She went over to the swinging door and tried to push on it, and the door wouldn't move. She pushed again and the door opened, but she was unable to put her foot across the threshold. She looked back at us and said, I'm not kidding around, I literally can't move my foot into the kitchen. The board again told her to not go in there. She pulled her foot back and sat back down at the table. We asked if it would get the bad spirits out of the house after we were done talking, and it said yes that it would. We decided to close the conversation and parted ways that night. I slept down in my mom's room again because I really didn't feel like being upstairs alone with whatever was in there by myself. Until we moved out, the dog would following something up the stairs a few times a month. I never saw anything, but I would get those weird feelings that someone was watching me sometimes. A few times when I was in the bathroom, I would hear low voices talking, but could never make out what was being said. We moved out about a year and a half later. After we moved into my mom's new house, the dog never stared at the stairs and wandered up them on his own. I never heard random voices that shouldn't have been there. The house has been torn down now. I want to say in the last year or two. It's weird. My mother-in-law had a friend move into town. She bought lots of things from local thrift stores and wanted to keep it local as possible. We helped her move in and find things over a few weeks. A month or so later, we all got together and something seemed off. She looked exhausted, only way I can explain it. But she looked more tired than anyone we'd ever seen. We asked if she was okay and if we could help. She just said, that house. She went on to say there's a presence, someone, something there. Late night footsteps, moaning, and that a shadow would stop outside her bedroom door and just stand there, the dark feet showing under the door. During the day, she said it was a heavy feeling lingering in the air. We went over and the moment we stepped inside, the air was heavy. Your mind felt like the whole house was slanted. She stayed maybe another 2 weeks and put the house up for sale and moved into an apartment. It still happened. We sold or donated every thrift store item she bought. It stopped, she never said when, but she went back to her old self and has been fine since. Sometimes I think back and pray God have mercy on whoever has that items. I wish we would have burned it all, rather than pawn it off. This happened years ago when I was still living at home with my parents. I was in my bedroom one day and had the door closed. It was only my dad and I home at the time. Now, for some context. At that time, my door handle to my bedroom door was broken, so I used to keep the door closed by using a scarf draped across the top of the door to kind of jam it shut. My dad didn't like me having my door closed, so he would often open it, telling me to keep it open. Anyway, that day I was sitting there and the door suddenly flew open with some decent force. Enough force that it swung right around and bounced off the wall. Me, generally frustrated, got up to give my dad an earful for being so aggressive with it, but he wasn't in the house. I went outside and he was down the back of the yard trimming the hedges. I said, "What did you open the door so hard for?" and that he almost put a hole in the wall with the door handle. He just looked at me confused and told me he hadn't been inside the house. I will say there was a breeze that day, but the force that the door opened up was definitely not caused by a breeze or a draft. I've also had a few instances where I've been home alone and heard things I couldn't explain. Once I heard what sounded like a man say, "Hello?" And another time, I heard a female voice calling out my name. I thought my mum has come home from doing the groceries and was calling me to come help bring them inside. But no, looked out into the driveway and no one was there. Even messaged her asking if she'd come home and then left again, but she said she was still at the store. I also once heard a clap sound behind me as I was sitting at the computer. Just sounded like someone did a single clap, about 2 meters behind me. There was also one instance where we, my parents, my sisters, and myself, were sitting in the dining room. We had a house-plant vine sitting in the corner. As we were sitting there chatting, one of the branches on the plant moved down and then bounces back up, as if someone had pulled it down and then let go. None of the other branches had moved, or else we would have assumed it was a draft or something. We all looked at each other like, we all saw that, right? All these instances, I searched for a logical explanation but couldn't find any.